Hello, Peter47890 here, Cyrus, and welcome to part 2 of my Devil May Cry reviews, a series of videos where I'll be looking into the Devil May Cry games in the HD collection, and see how they hold up as action games. And for today, we'll be looking into the infamous Devil May Cry 2. And for this video, I got my good friend Swordfish1390 here to discuss Devil May Cry 2. So, how are you doing, Sword?
Very good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Before we begin, I want to discuss our experience with the Devil May Cry series. For me personally, I've really only beaten Devil May Cry 1, as I just started the HD collection a few weeks ago at the time of this recording. So basically, this is my first dive into the Devil May Cry games. Though I did have a chance to play a bit of Devil May Cry 3 with my brother, like around a few years ago, but that's basically that's my experience with the Devil May Cry games. How about you, Sword?
When I was in middle school, I found Devil May Cry 3 for the PS2 at I think it was Circuit City, and then I bought it, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was really young. I didn't understand the mechanics. I only did like the first few missions, and after that I just kind of stopped. I didn't really enjoy it. And then I got back into Devil May Cry recently with the HD collection. I downloaded it from the PlayStation Store. The ones I beat were Devil May Cry 1, 2, and the infamous reboot, which I quite enjoyed. I played 3 and 4, but I didn't beat them. And so that's... Yeah, I don't really have a long history. I really only started playing them recently. But from the ones I played, yeah, I really enjoyed them. And so, yeah, there you go.
So, Devil May Cry 2. Man, does this game have a reputation in the series. Anyway, Devil May Cry 2 has had this reputation of being the black sheep of the Devil May Cry franchise. Well, before some other games in the series came about. And fans of this series have always ripped a new one in Devil May Cry 2, saying it's not only an awful Devil May Cry game, but also just a bad game in general. Why, a few others have said that even though it is certainly a bad and even outright terrible Devil May Cry game, they said that it's an average action game. So, where would you fit among those fan bases, Sword?
Well, I would have to fall under the camp of it is a terrible Devil May Cry game. It's just awful. And even if you don't compare it to the other games in the series, I think that even as a game by itself, it's below average. It's just got tons and tons of flaws, and which we'll obviously talk about in detail later. But just to sum it up for me, yeah, just no matter how you slice it, as a Devil May Cry game, it's bad. As a game by itself, it's bad. It's just not a good game.
Yeah, I probably fall in the same camp. Believe me, I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt and wanted to like it, especially with how there are some games in other series that have been deemed black sheep of their respective franchises, but I have come to play devil's advocate for those games and say why they are pretty flawed, they are not outright terrible games. But Devil May Cry 2 isn't one of these games. It's just a really bad game, and an absolute disaster of a follow-up to the first Devil May Cry game. So, without further ado, let's just see why Devil May Cry 2 is a disaster of a game that it is. Firstly, the visuals. As I say, in the HD collection itself, Devil May Cry 2 isn't that bad looking of a game in terms of the graphic conversion from the PS2 to the PS3. The character models actually look pretty decent, especially with how Dante looks in this game with his character design, which is a really cool design overall.
Yeah, it's funny because Devil May Cry 2, Dante's new design, that carried over in 3 and 4, and I'm not saying I dislike his design in the first game, but I actually thought that he just looked more badass in 2, so gotta give it credit where it's due.
But still, even with that said, I have to say what hurts it most in the visual department is the visual design of the game itself. It's just terribly drab, with the environments just looking dull to look at, especially with the color palettes. There's really no interesting locales to look at. They're just really generic looking, which is a huge step down from the first game, which had various interesting locations to look at with its gothic environments, as well as the first game being successful in being able to give a sense of scale to its locations with the camera angles you saw in the game.
And here, the thing too is that I feel that every environment just looks exactly the same with, oh, here's a brown city, and then here's a slightly less brown city. Just everything it felt like they kind of just recycled the same environments for every single mission.
Okay, now let's talk about the sound design. I'll just say, wait, before we do that, let's just talk about the animation. It's really clunky in this game. Yeah. Would you say the animation is subpar in this game, Sword?
Yeah, definitely a step down from the first game. It's just everything feels like it's really stiff and just doesn't look good. You kind of have to see it for yourself to really get what we're talking about. It's kind of hard to put into words, but yeah, just everything looks like it's, oh, I'm doing the robot when I'm moving. It just doesn't look very good. I mean, like Peter established, that the character models look fine, but the animations just look below average.
Now let's talk about the sound design. I have to say that I didn't really found any of the music to be all that memorable to me. It just really fit into the background. How about you, Sword?
Actually, surprisingly enough, I actually dug the soundtrack. I'm not saying it's the best in this series, but I thought that there were a good amount of standout tracks, like the ones that play right before you start missions. The battle theme was actually kind of catchy, and overall, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's not the best soundtrack I've ever heard, but I think it got the job done. I didn't really feel like anything was out of place, and there were like maybe 3 or 4 songs that sometimes I find myself going out on YouTube or something, hunting to listen to them. But overall, I think that the soundtrack is a step down from the first game, but it gets the job done as a whole.
The voice acting, on the other hand, still aged pretty badly like the first game, with the voice direction and voice acting itself being subpar. But there's one exception to the rule of this game, where the voice acting for one character is just a joy to hear. It is glorious. Just hear this.
Now I'll absorb his power. I will become an all-powerful immortal! What? What's going on?
Is there a problem?
You! Is that the medallia? You switched them?
A false coin for a false god.
This is absolutely hilarious. I mean, seriously, it's so funny. Especially since this character sounded like the usual evil dictator type of character that we usually see in movie or video games. And the transition to this type of personality with the voice that the voice actor is trying to portray is just really damn funny. I mean, it's shitty writing, it is, but it's just so funny. And honestly, I could probably say that one moment in the game is the only moment where we actually got some sort of enjoyment from Devil May Cry 2.
He starts off for like the first half of the game as this, oh, I am the evil bad man, I want to do bad things. Then halfway through he becomes a mad scientist. He's like, wow! I'm like, what? Is this like his twin brother or something? I don't understand. It's so bad, but it's so good at the same time.
Ooh, okay. Okay, let's continue on. Let's talk about the story. Which is to say, there really is none. I mean, there's a premise to it, which is to stop areas from taking over the world. That's really it. There's barely any cutscenes to really tell us why we are going to the various locations that we are, besides the game just saying, go there. And the storytelling is so poor that there are various plot points that comes out of nowhere due to how shit the storytelling is. Such as Dante collecting the Arcana. Why did he collect them? We know the Arcanas are important to Arius further on in the game, but who told him? How did he know they were important to Arius? How did he know where they were located? Who told him the existence of the Arcana? Never explained! Or it's explained so poorly that when the Arcana plot point came out, I go, huh? And plot points coming out of nowhere is especially apparent with the final boss of the game, where the final boss does basically come out of nowhere, and the game could have cut it out, the final boss, and you wouldn't lose a single freaking thing of value in the process. So, what's your thoughts on the story, Sword?
I honestly had no idea what was going on. I mean, it's just like, all right, Dante is in this city. Deal with it. We're not going to say why. We're just do it. Okay, so we go there, we do some stuff, we fight a boss, and then, okay, here's the next cutscene. You're here now. Do stuff. That's basically all it boiled down to. And it said there were almost no cutscenes. The cutscenes that were there, I felt were just ridiculous. Like, the whole thing felt like it was just nonsense. I really didn't feel like I was doing anything besides, oh, I gotta stop Arius, because why not? He's a bad man. And that's it. I mean, I'm not saying the first Devil May Cry game had a good story. In fact, it was actually pretty bad. But at least it was competent. At least it made sense. At least I knew what was going on. It might not be compelling stuff, but it's something. But here, I'm just like, scratching my head and raising an eyebrow at what's going on. It just feels like I'm thrown into these random locations because that's what you gotta do. That's Devil May Cry 2. You gotta do it. And everything felt so disconnected. And just, I can't even really say much about it because I didn't know what was going on. So overall, just very, very poor story. And I also want to mention the character Lucia real quick. Her accent is the worst thing I've ever heard. It's the worst fake accent. I don't even know what she was trying to go for. I mean, she's so bad. But I don't know. I just had to mention that because I was talking about the story. But as a whole, yeah, the story was weak and just stupid as a whole.
And the story overall is just a mess, with the storytelling being laughable, with how flawed the execution is. And if the game isn't invested in telling you its story, why should you be invested? Yeah. The characters also don't fare all that much, with most of them not displaying much personality, so you won't really get invested in them, or them not really having any distinct personality for you to connect to. This is especially insulting to Dante, as how he's portrayed in this game, as it's so different from the Dante we usually know and love, and he just comes off as a boring protagonist in Devil May Cry 2.
In the first game, he had lots of funny, if corny, one-liners, and then here it's just, oh, he might as well have a bunch of dots over his head, like, oh, what do you have to say first? Dante, ... He doesn't even talk. When the cutscenes are actually happening, he has no quirky, stupid one-liners to say like he did in the first game. It's just not the Dante I remember. I mean, and to be fair, he is different in all Devil May Cry games, but at least they said things, and they said funny things. Here he's just a mute. He's just like, he might as well be a solid protagonist. Hell, even Luger from Tales of Xillia 2 has more dialogue than Dante from Devil May Cry 2. That's sad, because he's actually a solid protagonist. It's just, I didn't like Dante in Devil May Cry 2.
I even go as far to say that the reboot Devil May Cry Dante has more correlation with Dante's usual personality that fans expect than 2 does. And that's saying something, seeing how fans really hate the new Devil May Cry Dante. Yeah. And the only thing of value in the character of Devil May Cry 2 is Arius. And only because of that one funny scene. Now, Sword, I only personally played Dante's campaign myself, so I'm just wondering if Lucia's campaign revealed more about the story or the characters, since you have played through it.
It expands a little bit on Lucia's backstory about her relationship with Arius, and it kind of had promise. I saw some potential in the writing in terms of their relationship. It seemed like it could have been something special, but it didn't really go anywhere. But at least I learned a little bit about her. And overall, it kind of suffered from the same problem as Dante's, where the story was, as a whole, just didn't really make any sense. And you're basically just reading all the same levels, exception of maybe 2 or 3 different levels. And it's honestly, it's really not worth playing because there's really hardly any differences, unfortunately.
But subpar story and characters can be forgiven in an action game if the game is at least fun to play. And Devil May Cry 2 is unfortunately not fun to play. Oh god, is it not fun to play. Anyway, let's just describe how the game plays like. Structurally, like most hack and slash games, you'll be going through various levels, hacking and slashing. Through numerous enemies, and be fighting what I could guess be called bosses in the game through a linear level with the various weapons that Dante will have at his disposal. And note that I put hacking and slashing and various weapons and even various enemies in air quotes, and I'll explain why. Okay. Let's just get all the things that this game does wrong. Firstly, the levels are way too big for the type of gameplay that Devil May Cry 2 is supposedly going for, with a decent and good amount of the levels just being empty space or with really boring puzzle segments, which really just disrupts the pacing, and the level just feels drawn out due to those elements and just feels boring to go through, with there not being enough action to throw in to keep players interested, or at least the interval between battle and going through empty spaces segments of the game is so uneven that feels like the game is drawn out. Not that the action of the game make it compelling to play through, but that's another story. The large spaces also make this game pretty easy, mostly due to the fact that ranged weapons are so overpowered in this game that you can easily just blast foes from afar without worry. Another problem is the combat system is so slow and clunky in Devil May Cry 2. I mean, just look how slow Dante is in this game. From him swinging his sword to his long ass recovery animation, the combat is just a bore to go through with how clunky it is. Especially with the melee combat. Most of Dante's melee attacks are so limited now. I mean, look at Stinger! Stinger's Dante's go-to move you use to close the distance. But in this game, you barely close any distance at all. And Dante barely have any moves in this game as well. And he's not able to learn any new moves or even get any new weapons. And the moves he does have is, as I said, so limiting. The combat overall just feels restricting. And that's mostly because of how shit Dante melee moveset is. And as a result, they don't feel all that satisfying to do. And this is not factoring in that most people will be blasting the various enemy types with guns because of how OP the gun is in this game, which is the next problem. The guns are way overpowered, where you can basically stand back and shoot enemies, as it not only do good damage to them, but also stun locks them to death, which just makes the combat so easy. That's not fun to play. Oh yeah, and the auto lock system in this game, it's garbage. So, what would you say are the bad parts of this game, Sword, in terms of gameplay?
Well, I would say everything, but let's break it down a little bit. So, I think in terms of the melee combat, you pretty much hit the nail on the head, where Dante's animations, especially compared to the first game, are so slow, where he goes whoosh, 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 and Devil May Cry 1, sure, it's not the deepest arsenal of moves that you could pull off, but at least it was satisfying. here it doesn't. It feels like I'm just slashing away at generic enemies. And another problem too is you mentioned the stinger. That's a good point, because whenever you're meleeing an enemy, in your final hit of your combo, they'll go flying. And for any other Devil May Cry game, when the enemy goes flying, you would close the distance to the stinger. But in Devil May Cry 2, Dante just does a little step forward and does the stinger. And melee combat isn't nearly as reliable because you have your dual pistols. I mean, sure, you get other guns, but the pistols are the best way to go. And this also leads me to the fact that the game has glitches in terms of enemies. I'll explain that, where I'll use there's a certain boss, for example, where there's this minotaur, giant minotaur coming at you, and then if you play your cards right, he'll be in the corner, he'll be stuck there, he'll keep doing the same magic spell over and over again. You just stand there and shoot. I beat that boss at full health because he glitched out and he got stuck in that one part. He couldn't move, and I just shot at him and won. I was like, you can't be serious. And as far as the level progression system goes, in the original game, you could collect red orbs and go to these statues to purchase new moves. I mean, it's not deep stuff, but it felt like, you know, oh, hey, I got this ability myself. I earned this. And in Devil May Cry 2, you don't learn new moves. All you do is you collect red orbs, you level up your weapon, and it does a little bit more damage. That's it. I mean, Dante gets new weapons in the sense that he gets different swords. And it's kind of pointless to equip different swords because they all feel the same, and then by the time you get another sword, your currently equipped sword was already going to be a high level anyway. So it's kind of a moot point at that. You don't need them. And it's just, it feels like the game was watered down for stupid people. I mean, there's a difference between simplifying something and watering it down. And Devil May Cry 2 is watered down. It's dumbed down. It's not nearly as deep or complex as the first game, and it just makes the game a bore to play, especially because the game is far too easy. I mean, like I mentioned with the guns, it's the guns that make the game a complete cakewalk, and it's just not fun to do. Every boss has a similar glitch where they'll either be stuck in an area or you'll be out of reach and you can stand by and shoot. It's the same thing over and over again. And the level design, like you also mentioned, everything is too big, and this wouldn't be nearly as bad if there were cool secrets to find, maybe a extra mission like the original Devil May Cry had, but all you'll do is, oh, here's some red orbs for you. You jumped up this wall and you found some red orbs. That's it. It's not rewarding. In fact, I often found myself wanting to just plow through the levels so the game would be over quicker. And overall, it's just a very boring game to play because it's too easy. Everything is watered down, and oh, don't even get me started on that goddamn lock-on system where there will be parts where you're swarmed by enemies, and then, oh, you want to attack this one guy? Oh, too bad. Dante's going to attack this guy that's slightly closer to him. You can't target one specific enemy. It's a pain in the ass. Although, I want to give special shout out to one slight improvement, was that there is actually a proper dodge button with a circle button. This is a really cool feature that was missing from the first game, and I mean, it only added to the game's difficulty, easy-ass difficulty, but I thought it was a cool little addition. I mean, it didn't add anything really because you didn't need to dodge, but it was something, and I thought it was a step up from the original. But other than that, yeah, the game is just a bore to play, and it could have been the game's saving grace, because that's what I play Devil May Cry for. We do it, slash away at enemies, get those S ranks, and all that good stuff, and Devil May Cry 2 doesn't have that, unfortunately.
But is there some good stuff in the gameplay of Devil May Cry 2? Yeah, I feel. Firstly, there is instantaneous weapon switching in this game for the pistol, because there's no point in instantaneous weapon switching for your melee weapon, since every sword you get is basically the same moveset. But at least there's instantaneous weapon switching in Devil May Cry 2, as opposed to Devil May Cry 1, where it got weapon switching in the game, though it wasn't instantaneous, so you couldn't really do it in mid-combo. And thankfully, the instantaneous weapon switching got transferred to Devil May Cry 3, which is great, since that's a good mechanic to take advantage of. And there are two bosses that are actually kind of fun to fight against. The first is Bolveric, and the second is actually the second phase of the final boss. As for the first phase, it's garbage, like most of the other bosses in the game. And overall, Devil May Cry 2 might be one of the worst sequels I played to a video game. Not because it's one of the worst games I played, I mean, it kinda is, but I have played worse, but just because everything to its design is like the antithesis to the first Devil May Cry. It's baffling. Like, the first game, gameplay-wise, had tight controls, had some variety of moves you could use, and moves were very useful in themselves. They got a good amount of enemy variety, where you had to take into account different strategies to deal with them. The combat itself was very fast as well. Well, no, pretty fast. And everything Devil May Cry 1 does right, Devil May Cry 2 does wrong.
It basically feels like it takes away everything that made the first game good. Let's take away the challenge. Let's take away weapon variety. Let's take away everything, and let's just make this mess of a game. And you know, it's like you wouldn't expect you usually would expect a sequel to live up to its original, because the original Devil May Cry hasn't aged gracefully, but it was a really good game. And that Devil May Cry 2 had big shoes to fill, and it's okay if it doesn't live up to its original, because that's hard to do, but you also wouldn't expect it to fail so miserably. I honestly don't know what happened here. I'm not really sure what was going on at Capcom when they were making this game. I really don't get it, and it's just at least Devil May Cry 3 came out. I think Devil May Cry 3 is awesome, and it more than made up for 2, but that doesn't change the fact that this exists, and it's just, to call it disappointing is an extreme understatement, but as a whole, it's just very, very bad.
And I think that's our thoughts on Devil May Cry 2. It's just a really, really bad game, and just a horrendous Devil May Cry game. I don't think we can add any more to it personally.
Nope, we bashed it quite a bit.
I mean, there are some facets of neat ideas in this game, like the instantaneous weapon switching, and you see some of the moves in Devil May Cry 2 being transferred to Devil May Cry 3 and actually being useful, like the double jump gun attack. But there's just nothing good in this game. It's just really, really bad. So yeah. And my brother, who hasn't even played Devil May Cry 2 and just saw me play through it, is saying, this is shit.
Which it is.
Yeah. But before we end this video, let's just say where this game ranks in the Devil May Cry franchise. Personally, even though I haven't played other games, I can't really see the other games being as bad as Devil May Cry 2. Devil May Cry 2 is just a really incompetent game. How about you, Sword?
It is easily the worst in the series. By far, bar none, no arguments, it is bottom of the barrel.
So, there you go. And this is comparing Devil May Cry 2 to all the Devil May Cry games, including the reboot. So there you go.
I also want to say that anyone who thinks that the reboot is worse than 2 cannot be taken seriously. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. 2 is objectively worse than the reboot.
So yeah, okay. Thanks for coming along with me for this review, Sword.
No problem, always glad to be on, and we shit on this game quite a bit.
But still, this game still has one glorious moment. And that's all, folks. Join me next time for my review of Devil May Cry 3.